Before we dive deeper into this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every day, we bring you real, gripping true crime stories that uncover the untold truths, the overlooked victims, and the shocking moments that the mainstream media often misses. By subscribing, you'll never miss a story that challenges what you think you know. We also want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think about this case. Who do you believe holds responsibility? What changes do you think need to happen? Your thoughts and opinions could be part of the conversation, shaping awareness and justice. Smash that like button if you believe these stories deserve to be seen, shared, and remembered. And remember, the underdog stories matter, and your voice helps keep their memory alive. August 9, 2014, Ferguson, Missouri. A quiet summer afternoon in a small city overshadowed by tension, history, and the heavy weight of systemic distrust. A young man walked down Canfield Drive, unaware that his life was about to collide with authority in a moment that would shock a nation. His name was Michael Brown. Michael was 18 years old, tall, strong, and full of dreams for a future that seemed just out of reach. A high school graduate, proud of his achievements, he carried the weight of adolescence, community expectations, and the subtle burdens of being young, black, and male in a town where fear and prejudice simmered beneath the surface. To his neighbors, he was a son, a friend, a young man with potential. To those in power, he was something else entirely, an assumption, a threat, a problem waiting to happen. It began simply. Michael Brown and a friend were walking in the street. A violation some officers in Ferguson had become obsessed with policing. Officer Darren Wilson, a white police officer, spotted them. A simple encounter escalated quickly. Words exchanged, tensions rising, a misunderstanding that neither side fully controlled. Michael's size, youth, and presence were immediately misjudged. The underdog, overestimated and endangered by a figure of authority, was about to face the full weight of a system designed to protect the powerful. Eyewitness accounts vary, perspectives clash, and fear escalates. In those moments, seconds stretch into eternity. A confrontation becomes a deadly exchange. Gunshots pierce the air. Michael Brown, unarmed, collapses in the street. His life ends abruptly, violently, leaving behind grief, outrage, and questions that would ripple across the country. The aftermath was immediate. Ferguson exploded. Protesters filled the streets, chanting, marching, and demanding accountability. The community, long accustomed to marginalization and mistreatment, refused to let Michael's death fade into silence. What began as a personal tragedy became a public reckoning. The underdog, underestimated and dismissed by authority, became a symbol of systemic failure and the urgent need for justice. The nation watched, riveted and outraged. Images and videos circulated online, exposing the raw reality of a young man's life stolen in a confrontation with law enforcement. Social media amplified the story, turning local grief into national discourse. Discussions of race, policing, and systemic inequality dominated newsrooms, classrooms, and dinner tables. The tragedy of Michael Brown was no longer confined to Ferguson. It had become America's mirror, reflecting the uncomfortable truths of bias, fear, and unchecked authority. But the legal system moved slowly. Officer Darren Wilson faced investigation, and the Justice Department conducted reviews. But the question of criminal accountability loomed. The underdog, whose life had been cut short, had no voice in the courtroom, while the powerful, shielded by law, unions, and procedure, remained protected. Dramatic irony cut deep. The world saw what happened, yet the system hesitated to act. Michael's death catalyzed a movement. Black Lives Matter, still in its early stages, found renewed purpose, calling for transparency, reform, and an acknowledgement of the humanity too often denied to young black men. Communities organized. Vigils and protests became daily occurrences. The city of Ferguson, once quiet and overlooked, became a focal point for national debates on policing, systemic bias, and the cost of underestimating those society considers disposable. The power dynamic began to shift, not in the courtroom, but in public opinion. Ordinary citizens, activists, journalists, and advocates amplified Michael's story, forcing officials to confront the consequences of their actions. The underdog, though powerless in life, ignited a movement capable of challenging entrenched authority. The streets, the media, and the global audience now held the powerful accountable in ways that formal institutions had failed to do. Yet the tension remained. Officer Wilson was eventually not indicted, a decision that inflamed protests and deepened distrust between community and law enforcement. Justice, in the conventional sense, seemed denied, but dramatic irony underscores the story. While the legal system protected the officer, the awareness and mobilization inspired by Michael Brown could not be ignored. The underdog's death had shifted the balance of power, compelling society to see the truth that authority sought to obscure. The life lesson here is stark. Unchecked authority can destroy lives in an instant, but the underestimated and overlooked can spark movements, ignite reform, and awaken the conscience of a nation. One life, silence in the street, became louder than any courtroom decision could dictate. The underdog, even in death, forced powerful systems to reckon with their failures and confront uncomfortable truths. And yet, the story is far from over. Ferguson was only the beginning. Across America, communities began to see patterns, recognize injustice, and demand accountability. Michael Brown's death became a cautionary tale. Who is next? How many more lives must be lost before the powerless are seen, heard, and protected? The suspense lingers, tense and unresolved, as the fight for systemic change continues. Part 2 will explore the nationwide impact of Michael Brown's death, the rise of protests, civil rights activism, and social movements that challenge authority. We will examine how communities mobilized to confront systemic injustice, how public awareness pressured institutions to reform, and how the legacy of one underestimated young man forced the powerful to reckon with their responsibilities. Michael Brown's story is not just a tale of tragedy. It is a call to vigilance, empathy, and action. It challenges viewers to question authority, recognize systemic bias, and ensure that no life is underestimated or treated as disposable. The streets of Ferguson, the communities across America, and the conscience of a nation remain haunted by a single question. Will society act before another life is cut short? The underdog struggle continues, and the suspense remains. Who will see before it's too late? Who will act when power underestimates the humanity in front of it? Michael Brown's story is unfinished, a tense reminder that justice is never guaranteed, but awareness and action can reshape the balance of power, and perhaps one day save lives. The death of Michael Brown ignited a fire that spread far beyond the streets of Ferguson. Protests erupted immediately, filling the roads with thousands of voices demanding accountability, demanding recognition of a young man whose life had been cut short for walking in the street. Communities that had long felt ignored and dismissed were now heard, their anger and grief amplified by a national spotlight. Social media carried images, videos, and stories across the country and the globe, exposing the raw reality of systemic bias and unchecked authority. Ordinary citizens, activists, and journalists amplified Michael's story, forcing local and national leaders to confront the consequences of their actions. The underdog, underestimated in life, had become a symbol of resistance, awakening the conscience of a nation. Vigils and marches became daily occurrences in Ferguson and other cities. Hands up, don't shoot became a rallying cry, a symbolic gesture reflecting the fear and vulnerability of those facing authority in communities long marginalized. The movement was no longer local. It was national, demanding justice, recognition, and systemic change. Schools, neighborhoods, and city councils engaged in discussions about policing practices, racial inequality, and civil rights. Citizens organized forums, educational programs, and workshops to understand systemic injustice and advocate for reform. The story of one young man transformed into a blueprint for collective action, illustrating how awareness and persistent advocacy could challenge entrenched power structures. Yet, even as protests surged and conversations expanded, legal accountability remained elusive. Officer Darren Wilson faced investigation, but the grand jury ultimately did not indict him, a decision that deepened the divide between community and the system sworn to protect it. Justice in conventional sense had been denied, yet the narrative had shifted. Dramatic irony lingered. The system protected the officer, but public awareness and pressure forced systemic reflection. Michael's death sparked a broader national reckoning, highlighting patterns of racial bias, police militarization, and the dangers of assuming threat based on appearance, age, or skin color. Grassroots organizations trained citizens on their rights, and mobilized to monitor law enforcement activity. Activists leveraged media attention to pressure governments to implement reforms in training, use of force policies, and transparency. The underdog, silence in life, had ignited a movement capable of challenging authority and reshaping public discourse. The life lesson became clear. Even when justice is denied, the power of ordinary people, the underestimated, and the overlooked can challenge systemic injustice, force accountability, and inspire change. Yet, the suspense remains. Across the nation, countless individuals remain at risk, lives still threatened by unchecked authority. Policies may have shifted, but fear, bias, and prejudice cannot be legislated away entirely. Michael Brown's death became a symbol, a warning, and a call to vigilance. Awareness and action are required to prevent tragedy, and complacency carries a cost. As Ferguson and cities nationwide grapple with these realities, the question lingered. How many more lives must be lost before society internalizes these lessons? How long will the underdog struggle continue before authority is held accountable consistently? Michael Brown's story is unfinished, a tense reminder that systemic injustice is resilient, and that the fight for equity, recognition, and justice requires persistence, courage, and collective vigilance. Part 3 will explore the long-term national impact of Michael Brown's death, the rise of social movements like Black Lives Matter, and how one young man's life reshaped conversations about race, authority, and systemic reform in America. The underdog struggle continues, and the suspense remains, waiting for vigilance, empathy, and action to prevent history from repeating itself. Michael Brown's death reverberated far beyond Ferguson. Across the United States, communities watched, listened, and mobilized. The images of a young black man lying in the street, unarmed and shot, ignited outrage, grief, and urgent demand for accountability. Black Lives Matter, still emerging as a movement, found new momentum. Activists, students, clergy, and ordinary citizens united, transforming local grief into national protest. Vigils, marches, and demonstrations filled city streets from New York to Los Angeles. Hands up, don't shoot became more than a slogan. It became a symbol of fear, resistance, and the urgent plea to be seen and protected. Social media amplified voices that had long been ignored. Videos, tweets, and posts carried the story into homes, classrooms, and offices across the country. Ordinary citizens, once powerless observers, now had the power to influence public perception and demand reform. The underdog, Michael Brown, underestimated, dismissed, and ultimately silenced, had ignited a national reckoning. Governments and law enforcement agencies faced unprecedented scrutiny. Police departments were pressured to reconsider tactics, implement de-escalation training, and address racial bias. Policies that had been overlooked or ignored were now debated, revised, and sometimes enforced. The power dynamic had shifted. Ordinary people, united by outrage and purpose, could challenge institutional authority in ways previously unimaginable. Yet, even as the movement gained momentum, the legal system lagged. Officer Darren Wilson faced investigation, but the grand jury did not indict. Public outrage intensified. The dramatic irony of the situation was clear. The powerful remained legally shielded, yet the underdog's death had galvanized a nation into action. Communities recognized patterns of systemic injustice that extended far beyond Ferguson. Across the country, other cases emerged, highlighting the vulnerability of marginalized populations in encounters with authority. The movement inspired education, advocacy, and legislative proposals, with ordinary citizens taking unprecedented steps to demand accountability. Michael Brown's death forced a conversation America had long avoided: whose lives are valued, whose are overlooked, and what happens when the system designed to protect fails to see the humanity of those it polices. The life lesson grew increasingly evident. Even when justice is denied in the courtroom, the power of awareness, advocacy, and collective action can shift the balance of power. The underestimated, the dismissed, and the powerless can awaken a nation's conscience and force institutional reflection. Yet the suspense remains. The fight for justice is far from over. Policies may change on paper, but fear, bias, and prejudice are entrenched. How many more lives will be at risk before society internalizes the lessons of Michael Brown's death? The underdog struggle, though amplified and recognized, is ongoing, tense, and unresolved. Part 4 will explore the long-term societal impact, The reforms inspired by Michael Brown's death and the enduring cultural resonance of his story. It will examine how one young man's life, tragically cut short, became a movement that challenged authority, influenced policy, and reshaped national conversations about race, policing, and justice. Michael Brown's story continues to demand reflection, action, and vigilance. The underdog's struggle has transformed the nation, yet the suspense remains. Will society act before the next tragedy occurs, or will the lessons of Ferguson fade, leaving another life vulnerable to misunderstanding and misjudgment? The story is unfinished, and the streets of America still carry the echoes of one young man who refused to be unseen, even in death. Michael Brown's death continued to shape conversations long after the streets of Ferguson quieted. Police departments across the nation face scrutiny, implementing de-escalation protocols, revising use of force policies, and banning controversial tactics that had endangered civilians. The chokehold, aggressive pursuit methods, and implicit biases were examined, debated, and, in some cities, reformed. Communities became active participants in monitoring law enforcement, organizing citizen oversight boards, and pushing for transparency. The movement sparked by Michael's death demonstrated that the underdog, even in life cut short, could wield influence far beyond what anyone anticipated. Black Lives Matter gained prominence as a national movement, connecting individual tragedies into a collective demand for justice. The protests, vigils, and activism in Ferguson became a model for how ordinary people, overlooked and underestimated, could force systemic change. Media coverage amplified the story, ensuring that the lessons of Ferguson reached classrooms, courtrooms, and city councils across America. The life lesson became clear. Injustice thrives in silence, but awareness, persistence, and advocacy can disrupt entrenched power structures. Even when a legal system fails, collective action can shift public perception, policy, and the moral conscience of a nation. Yet, tension remained. Officer Darren Wilson faced no indictment, and communities across the country realized that institutional protection of authority figures often outpaced accountability. Dramatic irony underscored the tragedy. While the system shielded the powerful, public awareness, outrage, and activism forced reflection and incremental reform. Michael Brown's death became a template for activism, education, and societal introspection. Citizens organized workshops on civil rights, educated neighborhoods about systemic injustice, and pressed lawmakers to consider legislative change. The underdog struggle, initially personal and local, had become a national movement influencing policy, culture, and public consciousness. And yet, the suspense lingered. For all the reforms, visibility, and awareness, lives remained at risk. Policies could change, but fear, bias, and human error could not be entirely legislated away. Michael Brown's story was a warning. Vigilance, empathy, and action are required to prevent the next tragedy. Part 5 will explore the enduring legacy of Michael Brown, examining how his life and death continue to inspire activism, challenge authority, and serve as a moral compass for the nation. His story demonstrates that the underestimated can ignite movements, that awareness can challenge power, and that justice, though imperfect, can be advanced through collective determination. The underdog struggle is never finished, and the suspense remains. Will society internalize these lessons before another life is lost, or will the cycle of injustice continue, testing the conscience of a nation once again? Michael Brown's story is unfinished, tense, and haunting, a reminder that one young life can challenge a powerful and awakened country, but only if people remain vigilant, empathetic, and unafraid to demand justice. Years have passed since Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, yet his name continues to resonate across the nation. His death sparked protests, movements, and conversations that reshape how communities and law enforcement interact. Streets once filled with anger and grief became symbols of a larger struggle for justice, equality, and recognition. Black Lives Matter emerged as a powerful force, connecting individual tragedies into a national call for reform. Michael's life, brief but impactful, became a blueprint for activism and civic engagement, demonstrating how the underestimated and overlooked can challenge systemic power. Reforms were introduced across police departments. De-escalation training became mandatory, aggressive pursuit tactics were revised, and policies regarding implicit bias were implemented. Community oversight boards, transparency measures, and advocacy programs empowered ordinary citizens to hold authority accountable. The underdog, silence in life, had transformed public perception and policy. forcing society to confront uncomfortable truths. Yet, the story remains tense and unresolved. Legal justice for Michael Brown was never fully realized. Officer Darren Wilson was not indicted, leaving many to question the efficacy of the system designed to protect the powerless. Dramatic irony remains. Authority was shielded, yet the movement inspired by Michael's death reshaped the moral and social fabric of a nation. Michael Brown's legacy lives on through protests, education, legislation, and cultural reflection. His story serves as a constant reminder that vigilance is required, that awareness alone is not enough, and that collective action can influence change even when conventional justice fails. The suspense endures across the country. Countless lives remain at risk. Policies may exist, but fear, bias, and prejudice continue to threaten the vulnerable. Michael Brown's story challenges every citizen to ask themselves, who will speak for the overlooked? Who will act before the next tragedy? And how long will it take before society truly internalizes the lessons of Ferguson? The underdog struggle, though historic, is ongoing, and the stakes remain human lives. Part 6, if it comes, will explore the continuing fight for justice, the nationwide efforts to reform policing, and the lives of those who, inspired by Michael Brown, refuse to remain silent. His story is unfinished, tense, and haunting, a reminder that one underestimated life can ignite a movement, awaken a nation, and demand accountability from the powerful. Michael Brown may have been silenced in the streets, but his voice echoes in every protest, every lesson, and every fight for justice that continues across America. The suspense remains, waiting, tense, unresolved. Will society act before another life is lost, or will the cycle of injustice claim the next underdog?